Hey there, it's my favorite historian, the Pompei one. I really liked her. She's good. So I'm really looking forward to her breakdown of the movie Pompei. Bloodier because it doesn't work. There's no point. That's the first time I disagree with her, to be honest. I am aware of the study she's pointing towards, and not to mention in honor of Pompey, of course. Always in honor of Pompey. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and I was informed that History Hit produced another video with a historian, specifically Dr. Daisy Dunn, whom I really liked. I have already reviewed her work on the channel on a dedicated video. In fact, let me put the headphones on. Come on, let's be professional. In other words, on this video here, History Hit expert blew my mind on ancient Roman history. You're probably starting to notice a pattern with my titles, but she was really good. Fantastic presentation, excellent information shared, and then I added my own and made it into a much longer video. It's a 48-minute video. I'll try to keep it shorter today. But then they released this, and as you can see, it's the same. Haha, let's check it out.
And here we have our hunk. I'd like to have seen him actually looking a bit fatter, if that makes sense. Now this is really, this is pushing things way too far. Hello, I'm Daisy Dunn. I'm an
let's go for pedantic. Pedantic for the win. Let's go.
author and a classicist, and I'm here with History Hit to do a deep dive into the film Pompeii.
Please. In honor of Pompey, of course. Always in honor of Pompey. Although the two things are not related. The city and the... Yeah. I would like to underline that I'm going to have to do a lot of cuts here, so sections of the movie I'll have to remove in editing, because otherwise, unfortunately, it gets copy claimed. It always gets copy claimed, and then they make me wait 30 days, not History Hit, the original owners of the movies. The video, as always, will be a little weirdly cut. For the full uncut version, it will be available to members, claim or not.
This is quite nice. This is a shot of the casts or pretend casts of the people who died in the eruption of Pompeii.
I love she says cast, because that's absolutely correct. As we were talking about in the previous video, they are not mummies. The corpses that you find in Pompeii, in all of those poses, like you're probably familiar with, those were just casts, in the sense that they were constructed in a way by filling a plaster that then would solidify and take the shape of the cavity of the inside of this collection of dust and debris and volcanic dust that sort of created a little bit of a silhouette of the original body that obviously decayed.
This looks to me like it's Pliny the Younger, who was the only eyewitness we have of the eruption, accurately translated from the Latin, so that's good. Oh, that's annoying. There's a mistake right at that final moment. Pliny the Younger, AD 79. It's true, the volcano erupted in AD 79, but Pliny the Younger did not write those words in the same year. He actually wrote those words nearly 30 years later. So it's wrong to put the date up at that moment. It's quite annoying, actually, for the...
Splendid. They, of course, would have known that if they had asked her.
So these are the casts that were created of victims who were found buried in the debris that came out of the volcano. And they show us the final positions of those people. So over 100 of them have been made. They're actually made by putting plaster into the imprints that the bodies, as they decompose, left behind in the pumice and the stone. So they're not actually the bodies themselves, but rather a cast made around them.
Theonomy is the scientific study of how organisms decay and become fossilized or preserved. It is a subdiscipline of paleontology and archaeology that examines the processes affecting organic remains from the time of death until their discovery as fossils or artifacts. The term derived from the Greek word taphos, burial, and nomos, laws. It encompasses biostratigraphy, diagenesis, differential preservation, site formation processes, and taphonomic bio. Moreover, this field is interdisciplinary, drawing from biology, chemistry, geology, and archaeology to provide a comprehensive understanding of how remains transition from the biosphere to the lithosphere. Pumice, but especially ash, would have continued to fall incessantly on Pompeii and the neighboring towns for days, and the corpses of the inhabitants ended up incorporated by the volcanic dust, which subsequently solidified. Inside, inside, the bodies decomposed and wasted away. So under the layers of ash which remained, cavities formed, like a sort of negative, and by filling these cavities with plaster casts, archaeologists were capable to create the casts of the victims which we find. It's wonderful to actually, it's not wonderful that the corpses and the bodies and the dead, no, but I'm saying it's wonderful to be able to underline this, and I'm glad that an expert who actually knows what she's talking about, a kind of a little bit of a rare event, a rare sight these days, says this, presents it, and then this goes into the hundreds of thousands of views, and then, this information. I made my own video discussing all of the process. I was baffled by the number of people and articles online that speak about these casts as being mummies or as being the actual corpses. A lot of people thought that they were corpses, and that's a failure within the educational system and the spread of false information on the internet. Hopefully something that we can rectify here.
Okay, so we've got something flashing, the rebellion of the Celtic horse tribes in capitals. This isn't a battle that is familiar from any of the ancient sources. It seems strange that they're going to AD 62 rather than going back to the Boudica rebellion, which is AD 60 to 61. So presumably they're trying to capture pockets of resistance that remain in the northern part of Britannia, but it seems rather far-fetched, rather peculiar to be going to this.
And the armor looks horrible.
Kind of strange, mythical scene. It all looks quite violent, and it evokes the Boudican rebellion. I don't know why they didn't just do the Boudican rebellion.
Yeah.
It seems weird. I don't know why they'd have been seeking to wipe out this village after the Boudican rebellion. It doesn't quite make sense, and why we actually need it for the story either.
I think they wanted to create this idea of establish the Romans were really bad. Got to judge it by the parameters of the past and the period, because otherwise if we're just saying, oh look, the Romans bad, then we can point the finger at ourselves and the things that we have done. Look at, for example, the 20th century, and there is a lot of bad. There is always bad with humanity. So I think in this case what they are trying to do is that they are trying to create in the watcher's mind this idea of Roman brutality, but they are doing it, as the professor is clearly pointing out, in a way that it's ahistorical. For the Romans to annihilate and wipe out an entire village makes no sense, because what that does is that it diminishes the number of taxable people and workforce to exploit for resource production. So you can say whatever you want about the Romans, but they were methodical. The Romans did deal in horrific ways. Look at, for example, De Bello Gallico by Julius Caesar, and when he cut off the right hand of all the men from the rebellious village in a specific section in Gaul. Absolutely, but at least that one is something historically mentioned that then we can discuss as a particularly horrible retribution, if you will, against rebellion towards the authorities, which is always, look at what they did in the Middle Ages, for example, when it comes to that hang, quartered, execution methods. There is a lot. There's always been something that the authorities do when they are challenged. Yeah, as I say, that I agree with her 100%. This is a very strange framing, and I think it was done for specific purposes when it comes to the emotions summoned, evoked into the viewer. Londinium.
I like this shot. We're seeing the city laid out. It looks, I have to say, my first impression is it looks very, very built up, considering that much of it had been completely laid waste to during the Boudican Rebellion only 17 years earlier. That said, we've got the city in the right place. So the ancient city of Londinium was east of the modern capital, so it's more in the city of London, as we call it today. The Thames running along the bottom. I'm particularly pleased with this. We've got the Walbrook, this kind of tributary leading off the Thames, is the River Walbrook, which is now a subterranean river. And Londinium was built up around this for reasons of trade, so that all looks quite accurate. It's raining, of course, because it's Britain.
Yes. Oh, I can relate to that. Goodness gracious, in the years I spent in England, I can only remember 4 weeks without rain.
The walls
should not be there.
Are actually very, very accurate.
I disagree.
For where they should be. The only problem is that the walls going around the city were built decades after.
Oh, there we go. Well, then I don't disagree. I think she's just nice. I'm like the condescending type that goes like, nonsense. She also thinks it's nonsense, but she's got touch. She's got class, unlike me.
This is supposed to be. So we're talking,
Exactly.
50, 60 years forward in time at least. Similarly, up in this top left corner, we have, this is Cripplegate Fort, which is accurate, but that was built about 120 AD, and we're here in sort of 79. So timing-wise,
Yep.
it's completely wrong, and it's very, very frustrating.
There he goes. You see, that's it. We share the same feeling. It's just announced in a different way.
So they've obviously gone to a huge amount of effort to get this very, very accurate in terms of, sort of the archaeology and the architecture of the city, but the timing is really off.
It is impressive that they did get the river, the tributary river, can't even pronounce it, right, the one that is now subterranean, as she was explaining. That is impressive. Would have been nice to see a few more boats in here, but then again, that's just me nitpicking, because I like nitpicking. I love nitpicking. And I'm gonna nitpick about that armor. What on earth? Look at those cuts. Wait.
The city, but the timing is really off.
I mean, look at the space. Can we focus on this for a moment? Look at the space in between these scales, whatever they are, these laminae. You could thrust so easily into these gaps in here. In fact, let me put it this way. This armor actually favors that, because imagine that I'm stabbing with my sword, right? And then I want to get into the gap, but I miss ever so slightly. And my thrust goes in here towards like the center of this square. Regardless of where I hit, what this is gonna do, it's gonna make my blade glance off into what? The gap. So these squares are perfect for guiding the point, the business end of your blade, into the gaps. This is so in fact, as you can see, it's all blood here because it doesn't work. There's no point in wearing this whatsoever. Someone even screamed useless from the crowd, and I think to me, they're talking about the armor, and you cannot convince me otherwise.
So we're now in an amphitheatre, and fortunately an amphitheatre definitely did exist in Londinium by this date, so that is fine.
Yeah. Man, look at that. It's a lake of blood. But is this, and that's supposed to be gladiatorial combat? Well, given when they were executing criminals, absolutely. Because that is what the mortality rates within the arena increase exponentially when they put criminals in it. Because, yeah, they would die. In fact, the famous phrase, Hail Caesar, Ave Caesar moriturite salutant, Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you, was not uttered by gladiators, as I often say, was uttered by criminals that were about to be executed, but it's just that instead of executing them, you would have them fight in a mock naval battle called Naumagia, so they would be more entertaining for the masses and for the authorities and the upper echelon. But yeah, so if this is with criminals, sure, I mean, I suppose, but if, although then again, that's a lot of blood, but if this is actual gladiatorial combat, then no, because usually gladiators don't die. Occasionally they do, because I mean, it is a intense, brutal combat sport, not enough to get a lake full of blood, so it kind of depends on what they were trying to recreate here.
And here we have our hunk.
She's adorable.
I would say, as of Roman gladiators, we now know that they had mainly a vegan diet or sort of vegetarian diet.
I disagree.
They ate mainly beans, they ate lots of grain, and the idea was generally to build up.
They also ate cheese, so not vegan. And even that's the first time I disagree with her, to be honest. I am aware of the study she's pointing towards, and not to mention the fact that that was specific of one school in one region. There were a lot of gladiatorial arena throughout the entirety of the empire, and and the republic, and to think that one school and the kind of food and dietary habits that they had would represent the entirety of the ludus of the schools of gladiatorial combat throughout the republic doesn't make sense. But even if we focus on that specific school, once again, food availability, food habits, cuisine would change dramatically between Britannia and Italia. Yes, they were eating a lot of beans, they were also eating cheese, so that already makes it non-vegan. And when it comes to vegetarianism, no, they would eat some meat. It's just that in general, meat is not eaten as often. Lard, definitely more often as something to add. But yeah, it was carb intensive. That's how I would describe it. It was carb intensive, but not a vegetarian diet. It would make no sense. And vegan even less.
Up a really sort of thick layer of fat beneath.
But then again, the study about the idea of gladiators were fat, I disagree entirely with that study. Also because, I mean, look at this. Does this guy look fat to you? One instance of one skull and what we could find of organic stuff that degrades anyways is not sufficient as a sample pool to then make statements that contradict the iconography. The iconography shows, of course, he's not like a bodybuilder, but this guy's fit. This guy is muscular. Look at his arm. I think the body fat percentage, in fact, is relatively low. I mean, this guy looks good. And so there's this other guy on the right. And they're not skipping leg day, I can tell you that much. So we have so many mosaic iconography representations, imagery that shows gladiators being muscular and fit, that there is no reason to think that they weren't and they would be fat simply because of one finding and one person that wrote a book about it and made some questionable statements based again on very inconsistent and non-reliable geographically bound evidence and data. So I strongly disagree with that. Once again, I know where she's coming from, but I don't think that that's a viable study, and I reject the premises. Would there have been gladiators that perhaps, if they belonged to the Murmillo class, so the heavy gladiator classes, maybe you had a guy and he was like a former slave of war, and he's like a big guy with big arms, big shoulders, but he's got a bit of a gut. Could he still be a gladiator? Yes. Absolutely. I also think that training a lot would have burnt a lot of that, but regardless, you could have the occasional man. I'm not saying absolutely not, but I'm saying this idea that gladiators were fat, nonsense.
The skin, so if they were injured, if they were stabbed, they'd have sort of quite a bloody wound, but they wouldn't actually be injured to such a degree that they couldn't fight on. So there'd be quite surface wounds rather than really devastating wounds or kind of wounds to organs. So I'd like to have seen him actually looking a bit fatter, if that makes sense. I think he should have been a little bit fatter at this stage. I think, he's looking very...
Shame on him. Shame on he's fat phobic. She's adorable though, so even though we disagree on this point, she's also probably mentioning there is a source that can be a little misleading depending on how you read the Latin. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the links, where they do make fun of a specific famous person as saying you've got the body of a gladiator, but then again, once again, there were gladiatorial classes. A Retiarius wouldn't have the same body as a Murmillo, who wouldn't have the same body as a Secutor. They would be divided into classes, so once again, generalistic statements don't make the rule. But that is talking about Secutor, that is a Secutor helmet, and I love it.
Very ripped, and I'm sorry to say that I think most Roman gladiators were actually a little bit on the tubby side.
Disagree. So?
This is quite strange. So Thracians were a type of gladiator.
Yeah.
And they usually had a sort of a small shield, they had a scimitar and a helmet. They definitely were not carrying tridents. Tridents were carried...
Oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Retiarius is the gladiator with the trident. So I did not see that. That is absolutely ridiculous. And also, the helmet is nice, but what the heck is it wearing underneath it?
By the net catcher, the Retiari type of gladiator. So there seems to have been a bit
And she didn't mispronounce it. She just pronounced it in plural, by the way. Retiarius, Retiari.
of a fudge between two different types of gladiator. Oh, this is surprising. This is a schizo gladiator. So this is actually quite a rare type of gladiator. They had this sort of rounded blade, which is kind of attached to the arm via a tube, and this sort of big, heavy helmet. But they weren't gladiators that you were coming across regularly by comparison with Thracians and net catchers and other types.
Yeah, so every single gladiator is getting murdered here, which is of course not realistic. It's once again perpetuating this myth that gladiators were just expendable, but the reality of fact is that even though sometimes gladiators did die, the mortality rate would have been relatively low because it would be extremely expensive. I mean, could you imagine that every single time after every single arena event, then you have to go and find all of these new gladiators and retrain them all over again? How could you make a profit? How would the schools would just... And oftentimes when gladiators get killed, the emperor actually gives some money to the school because it's a problem. Like they need, because they want to make sure that the school can recover from the loss. It's a loss. So yes, the movie is inaccurate. I imagine she's going to mention that. Yeah, he literally killed every single one of them.
This is quite extreme. I have to say, when gladiators were in training, they would have been trying to preserve their lives. They could go out to fight. It wasn't common for them to be killing each other while they're just training in the barracks, because gladiators were really, really expensive to
and even while they were at an event,
train up and to sort of to preserve. So even when they're going out to fight, there's probably about 1 in 8 who are actually dying in battle. So in this kind of situation, it seems slightly bizarre.
Yeah, not to mention, absolutely, for the training, we should have seen the usage of rudis, which is the wooden gladius, precisely because it's stupid to train with live weapons and then they all get murdered. It's nonsense.
This is a nice opening shot of Pompeii. It's slightly model village-like, perhaps, but we've got a nice tomb-lined road. They definitely existed.
Oh yeah, one thing that wouldn't have existed is, why is the volcano tip already shaped in the way it would after the explosion, after the eruption? That is a massive mistake.
In the ancient world. The volcano in the distance, I'm slightly less happy with.
Yeah.
Today we see Vesuvius as these sort of 2 peaks, but at this time, before it erupted, it looked very much more like a mountain.
Yep.
So you expect this kind of triangle rather than having 2 peaks. And I think here you're seeing slightly too much of this. You're seeing too much of this caldera, which was sort of created during the eruption.
That is a massive, for a movie focused on the Pompeii and the events that occurred in 79, it is incredible to make this level, this mistake. That is unbelievable. I'm shocked.
So at this time, most people believe that this was a mountain.
Just a mountain, yeah.
A modern fresco, a contemporary fresco at that time shows the volcano very much as this kind of single peak like this. So I think this looks a little bit too volcano-like. Festival of the Vernalia. So from this, that happened on the 19th of August. It was a festival held in honour of Bacchus, the god of wine. Yep. And it suggests already that they're going to go with a traditional date for the eruption of Vesuvius. That is the 24th of August. That's the date that's come down through some of the manuscripts of Pliny the Younger's letters. But in recent years, there's been a great amount of questioning as to the accuracy of that date, because the archaeological record seems to suggest that the eruption took place further into the year, further into autumn, and it looks much more likely to have been October or November.
Although a precise date has not yet been defined, today we can affirm that the eruption occurred after September 7th or 8th, and probably between the 24th of October and the 1st of November 79 AD. We know this because we have seen a silver denarius celebrating the declamation of Emperor Titus, which we know took place after the September 7th or 8th, and the discovery in Pompeii of an inscription bearing the date of the 17th of October. Another element that helps to temporarily place the event is the discovery, under the layers of ash caused by the eruption, of typically autumnal fruits, so fruits that are usually available during autumn, such as dried figs, walnuts, chestnuts, and pomegranates, vessels containing already sealed musts, and braziers already in use in houses for heating rooms. Previously it was believed that the eruption occurred on the 24th of August, taking cue from the date present in a letter from Pliny the Younger, who, writing to Tacitus, narrates the death of his uncle Pliny the Elder, who died in the disaster. But given the evidence listed above, many lean towards a transcription error.
Beautiful bird's eye view of the city of Pompeii. We've got lots of these sort of insulae, these blocks that they had that we can still find in the ground plan with these gardens.
It is wonderful to visit, by the way. If you ever get a chance and say you're visiting Italy, maybe you're in Rome, then from Rome you can pop up on a train and get to Naples relatively quickly. That is, of course, I'm not even going to tell you. Usually you could get to from Rome to Naples within 2 hours or even faster if you get one of the fastest trains. But then again, trains are always late in Italy, so then again you have to factor that one in. But regardless, once you're in Naples and from Naples going to Pompeii is very, very simple. It's because it's very close.
In between. In the middle here, we've got this round thing here. It's the Macellum, which was the sort of the marketplace, and it did look a lot like that, with a lovely arch right next to it. That was there, and here
probably the arch should have been painted.
We have a temple, which is the temple of Capitoline Jupiter and Juno and Minerva.
Yeah, so temples in Rome were inside cities, where usually temples in ancient Greece will be placed outside of cities, particularly major temples and on top of like hills surrounded by nature. The Romans made temples as integral part of their urban settlements and realities. That is one of the differences between the two approaches from an architectural standpoint.
So it's sort of the triad of deities, and that opened out onto the forum, which again looks very, very accurate to me. We've got a sort of a temple of Apollo to the side. We've got some warehouses down here. I'm really impressed with this. Yeah. What are these women wearing? Roman women typically dressed in quite a conservative manner. They wore a tunic, they wore a stola. They were not going around the streets wearing plunging necklines and having cleavage on.
Yeah, not to mention that the fact that they only have one layer. In the Middle Ages, this becomes even more of a problem in movies, because medieval people would be wearing 3 layers at least. Well, at least they got pretty colors, because that's one thing that annoys me when they only see brown, greys and blacks. At least we've got some pretty colors, but I'm already expecting the leather bracelets.
This again is sort of stretching reality. You wouldn't have had respectable women rushing through a city on their own. When women went out, they had to be protected by a male guardian, as they called it. That was usually their father or their husband. They weren't sort of running free through the city on their own.
Particularly if they belong, to an upper class family or even a sort of wealthy upper middle class already. Strange that the children are not wearing the bulla. That's another thing that it's weird from a Roman perspective. The medallion in the form of a sun for little boys and a half a moon for little girls that marked the fact that they were citizens. This is kind of nice though, that you can see that there were stands where you could just grab some lunch and eat it standing. That is absolutely correct. So here we see some bread that has been baked. Of course, bread is as ancient as mankind, probably almost. And then there is some pulse, I imagine, which is a type of soup that can be enriched with cheese, meat, lard, and you can dip one of your hardtacks, particularly if you're in the military.
Street corner.
Look at those statues in the background though. The statues are completely white. The marble statues, that's nonsense. They should be in full color and painted to be lifelike. And we know that because we've got a lot of like statues which still have remaining pigments, whether it be visible pigment, which sometimes we have, whether it be invisible pigment that we can use technology, X-ray, spectroscopy to actually reveal, or whether it be the way it's represented specifically in Pompeii, which is why it pisses me off. In Pompeii, we've got representations that show a painting that shows, or a mural that shows statues, and these statues are in color in the painting, so because that's how they saw them. Even the columns.
Coming here to something called a thermopolium, and these existed on sort of a lot of the street corners in Pompeii. They're essentially sort of a fast food stand.
And Rome.
And they had these sort of gaps for sort of sunken vats of food that you could kind of keep warm, like soups and various things like that. So that looks very accurate. And I also highly approve of these bread rolls they have here.
Me too. They look exactly like the ones we see in iconography. But look at the columns. These are, I believe, Corinthian columns, but they are completely white, which is once again... And even if you look at the background, all of the structures here, everything is white with a red little rooftop, even though we know that everything would have been blue and red and green and painted them. Yeah, with some white, but together with other colors, including, of course, the columns. It's like they are Roman people dressed in modern clothing, to be honest, with the revealing of cleavage, put inside of ruins that just look unbroken. But these are still ruins. This is not what the past looked like. It would have been a lot more polychromatic in nature.
We know from the carbonized rolls that they found at Pompeii that they were usually baked round, and they had these sort of cut sections for dividing the bread up and sharing it.
Nice.
I like this sunken street here in Pompeii. They existed with these sort of stepping stones as well. I have to say my one criticism is the street is a little bit too clean. In antiquity, it would have been running with muck, it would have been sort of waste, and this is partly why you had these stepping stones, so you didn't have to sort of dirt your clothes while crossing.
I kind of like the fact that the walls have some graffiti, because that was a thing.
The road. There's a lovely touch here on the side. There is some graffiti.
Yeah, there you go.
And it is showing, it looks like a gladiatorial fight. So this would have been the equivalent of a poster in Pompeii, this was very, very popular, particularly when there were sort of coming games and there was a politician who was supporting those games and sort of sponsoring them, putting them on. They'd find these kind of adverts up on the side of buildings.
Let me see what are the sections, because as always in my React content, I don't react to the entire thing in order to encourage people to click the link in the description or the pinned comment to finish the video with the original creator. But we've got gladiators here, volcano earthquake, yep, Pompei arena, senator arrives in Pompeii, gladiators at a party, yeah, look at the statues, start of the gladiatorial games, volcano eruption, tsunami, and pyroclastic flow. That's going to be fantastic. Maybe we could react to more sections on another video. I could do a part 2. I'm absolutely going to do a part 2 because 1, this is pretty long, and 2, this way I give people time to go and watch the original episode, and then they can come back here for when I release the second section. Maybe I'd like to watch the part here about gladiators, and we'll leave everything else for the second part.
It's nice sort of hearty porridge there for the gladiators. I'm surprised to see...
I always say soup, but it's more correct to say porridge, and sometimes I catch myself in my mistake of translation, but I didn't today, so I'm glad she said porridge, because it's more correct to say it's a porridge.
So many of these gladiators all together in one single mess like this. I think that would have been very, very dangerous to have as a situation. In gladiatorial barracks, typically all the weapons were locked away. So the only weapons actually allowed there were sort of dummy weapons, wooden weapons. And there were guards all over the place to try and ensure that fights didn't break out, and if they did, that they were dealt with.
Which of course happened. If you think of Spartacus, but even the rebellion in Sicily, things did happen through gladiators, so it makes absolute sense that authorities would do that. And here are the leather bracelets, as always.
Very, very swiftly. Most of the gladiators would have spent their time in sort of cell-like rooms, essentially, around these barracks, rather than all being kind of living in this very, very communal, lovely sort of way. So I think this is perhaps a glamorization of the reality.
I think this is a good point to stop this first react, and as I say, go check out the rest of the video so that you'll be prepared to know what she has already said. I still don't know, and then I'll do my reaction as always without watching, so that I can do a first impression reaction and then share my opinions. Anyways, as always, she's been fantastic. She's great, one of my favorite historians that join History Hit. As always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you're not yet a member of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.